Okay, I restarted my computer last night, so things should go smoothly, but we'll see how that happens. It's so great to see you all and be here. I really appreciate you all being here, as Lindsay said too. My name is Erin Horan, and I am in the Center for Teaching, Research, and Learning. I'm the Assistant Director for Research, Assessment, and Pedagogy. And so in this workshop, what we're going to talk about is research on and techniques for student engagement in synchronous class sessions. And so the goal is to talk about synchronous class sessions. We're primarily thinking about online classes because of the summer being online, but I welcome thinking and talking about fall and face-to-face teaching and what that means for pedagogy. And then a little bit just about the state of the world that we're in and what we mean by student engagement, and really acknowledging what students and humans worldwide have been through this past year and a little bit, in addition to all of the other traumas that have been placed on our students. So we're going to talk about kind of just everything to think about. And so the goal is to just get some ideas as you're getting ready to teach in this summer and the fall. And so as Lindsay already said, please go ahead and use the raise hand function. I'll have my chat up and the participant screen. So I should see if you raise your hand, but Lindsay will relay anything, which is awesome. Thank you, Lindsay. And then please feel free to use chat freely. Feel free to just throw ideas, questions, comments. I'll raise some questions, but yeah, feel free to just use the chat as you see fit and what makes sense to you. And so for a second, go ahead and just with the reactions buttons, go ahead and just click reactions if you see those on your screens and just try to react in some way. You can raise your hand. Lindsay's raising your hand, great. And then, or you can celebrate, you can clap. Yeah, there's lots of really cool options. You can tell me to go faster, which is fine. But that is helpful to do just a quick check-in of should I keep going or should we stop for questions? So great, awesome. Does anyone need help finding the reactions button?
Erin, I just had one other thing to add. Closed captioning is available if that's something you would like. It is live, so it's, I would say 99% accurate, but if you click on the closed captioning icon, you can add that as well.
Oh, cool. What a time to be alive. That's awesome. Is it subtitle settings?
Yeah, it makes subtitles underneath your presentation.
Okay. I'm too intimidated to play with this in front of everybody. So too much cognitive load to, to make happen, but thank you, Lindsay. Yeah, so the reactions can be helpful. You might not have all the reactions available. That's totally fine. But just go ahead and play with them if you want to. And it's good to just check in with students that they know where this is. The first day of class really is the only time it's important, but just to make sure that they know how to raise their hand at a minimum if that's what you're going to be using. So some of the learning outcomes for the session, we're going to think about defining engagement and what is a conceptual definition of engagement. How do we measure it? Some strategies to evaluate engagement in synchronous sessions. Again, thinking about online, but open to thinking about the future and face-to-face in the fall. And then selecting tools best suited for your course learning outcomes that offer maximum student engagement. So again, always going back to the learning outcomes and thinking about this distinction between engagement and participation. And so we want students to be engaged in a way that makes sense for the learning outcomes. Of course, never just checking to see if they're there and checking in that they're there. All right, so jumping right in, let's go ahead and in the chat box, and I'll play with actually the closed captioning while you all do that. In the chat, write your first name, what you teach, maybe a question you'd like, anything you want to share. These are just suggested prompts, but just anything you'd like to share with me and the group. So my sample is there. I'm Erin. I teach psychology and education courses. I'm here to facilitate, and I'm interested to see why you're all here. So I'm going to pause just so that you can focus on writing. Awesome. These are great. So lots of different fields and disciplines here. A lot of first timers to AU. Welcome to AU. That's very exciting. Just some curiosities about Zoom and learning some of the tips and tricks. One of the things I'll say is just probably practice for sure. And make sure that you take some time to play with all of the features in Zoom. It's good to get a handle on all of the different things available. So I tried to play with subtitles. I don't know if they're even up right now. I'm seeing them on, Lindsay, do you see anything?
I see the Zoom subtitles. It started to do your PowerPoint subtitles, but then it went away.
Yeah, that's okay.
It says microphone permission, but.
Okay, so oh great. So we've got some subtitles. Okay, cool. Thanks, Lindsay. That's awesome. Zoom has done so many updates and just recently that, yeah, this is great. Thank you, Lindsay. So you might have to select to see them and play around with them. Definitely something to look into for getting prepared for teaching in the fall. So let's see. Yeah, so as I was saying, so getting acclimated to everything you see in Zoom. So what I'm looking at right now, I have two screens and I have my presentation on one screen, and that's the screen that you all are seeing. And then in front of me on my big monitor is my notes in the PowerPoint. I also see my participants. I see all of you, a list of participants so I can see if you're raising your hand. I've got the chat, and then I've also got the little Zoom dashboard at the top so I can mute myself and everything. So it takes a while to get used to. And then I'll have breakout groups in a little bit. So just total chaos. So definitely play with it a little bit and get in a Zoom room with a couple of people if you can, just to practice with it. And then it gets so much easier as you go. And just being open with the students, letting them know we're all getting used to it, and here to learn from each other. Awesome, great. So face-to-face online, great. Keeping students engaged. I saw some of the responses. I had sent out a survey that some of y'all had sent, and I got some responses about questions that you all have, so I'll address some of those. That's something that I'm planning to talk about, is keeping students engaged. How do we get them prepared to come to class and be ready to do the learning and actually participate in the learning process? And of course, there is a place for lecture and providing information directly to students without the need for kind of talking about it, but figuring out when those are, and when you need to really have students working with the material. Great, so go ahead and feel free to throw in the chat if you haven't yet. And so one thing in this session is just being really thoughtful and thinking about why I'm doing certain things. And so just that question there was really helpful. It allowed me to see that you know how to use the chat. And if you hadn't, I'd probably, check if we were going to keep meeting, I'd check back in to see, was everything okay? Did you just not have a chance to write in chat, which is totally fine? Or did you not find the chat? I took attendance, which can be one measure of engagement. It checks that you're here and answering questions. Probably not the measure I'd like to use for this class. I'd probably more so want to check that you're in the breakout groups and chatting with your colleagues. But one measure, and then I got an idea of why you're here, which is really important, in addition to that survey that I sent out yesterday. And so starting with some of the things that we've seen about student engagement and with online learning especially. And so just, everyone here is here to talk about student engagement. And so I think we've already got kind of the buy-in and the understanding that it's important to have students engaging, but just to kind of remember why it's so important. We have some studies looking at the reasons that engagement is so important in online learning. So engagement activities likely influence the amount and level of student learning, including the student's higher order thinking. And so engaging with material, working with material allows us to really get students to attain those higher order thinking skills, things like creating and synthesizing, and putting all of the information together. Those get attained by having students engage with the material. It also seems to produce higher student satisfaction as well as retention rates. And so sometimes we think of this kind of as secondary, but this is essential. This is, this is key. It's really important, not just that students are attaining the learning outcomes, but that all students are attaining the learning outcomes. And satisfaction relates to that and getting them motivated. There's a lot that goes into these things. And then the impact of engagement activities, both singly and combination, needs to be studied further. So this is just an acknowledgement that we're still learning a lot. Being totally online this last year has taught us a lot at AU. And it's really, it's kind of informed the field of education and online teaching as much as it can, because we're still in a pandemic and it's still an emergency situation. And so as much as we've been implementing all of these things that we've been trying to over the last year, it's really hard to be expert at it whenever we're still in an emergency situation. So information has been attained from this last year, but definitely, worthwhile to be cautious about generalizing that to every online teaching situation. So operationalizing engagement, and I'd like to take a sec to just read your thoughts. So in the chat, how do you know when students are engaged? Whether it's if you're taking a class, teaching a class, face-to-face, online, just a couple of things that are markers so that students are engaged. I'll pause for a sec. These are all great. Awesome. So replying to questions, asking questions, these are great. Responding to a prompt, really great to, if you're looking at asking questions as a marker of engagement, you also want to give an opportunity to students who might not ask questions or might not have questions or just might not be asking questions in the class. Great. Cameras on is one indicator, definitely an indicator. Pros and cons to cameras being on. In all honesty, this last semester, by the end of the semester, I have 40 students, and by the end of the semester, literally the last class, nobody had their camera on, and that was okay. It's hard. It's hard for the excitement of teaching and everything. So, it's one of those things where it's not telling you everything. Requiring cameras to be on, again, during an emergency situation is tough, and so I don't. So, it's one measure, it's helpful to think about, but really think about why you want their cameras to be on and everything. Is it a similar thing where a learning outcome of the course is that you want them to be prepared to engage in professional meetings or whatever those learning outcomes are? That's totally a valid reason to be requiring cameras to be on in the class. For me, teaching psychology is a natural science. It's an AU core course. It's one of their general education courses. I didn't have a reason related to learning outcomes to do it. So, but I will acknowledge it's tough. It's really tough to teach to 40 students without kind of some of that feedback. And so for that reason, I have a lot of engagement opportunities, and they are required to go into breakout groups and going into other places. So a little bit about cameras, that's great. Participation through questions, comments, referencing the readings, that's great. Showing that they're engaging with the content, not just kind of engaging with each other and with me. Great. Taking turns speaking, sharing comments, that's great. So kind of building that rapport with your students where they know that the goal is for everyone to talk. And so by the end of the semester, you've kind of developed that class where people just know what to do. They know what to expect. My students, as soon as they come into class, we were talking about classical conditioning, and they said, as soon as we come to class, we know there will be a breakout group. So they get used to that, and they start to come in ready to work and ready to know that they're going to have to put something together as a group by the end of the class. Great. Reactions, offline discussion. I love that offline discussion, and like those opportunities for group work. That's really great. A lot of facilitation that's required for these things to be successful, though. Awesome. Right, breakout groups quickly. Great. And to say you have a policy for requiring cameras to be on, that's a really great question. We do not. The cameras on policy has been that they discourage you from requiring cameras to be on. So we discourage you, AU discourages requiring that. And so at the end of the day, it is up to you. And, we just recommend thinking about the learning outcomes, thinking about why you want it. So yeah, that's the policy. asking students to have them on for guest speakers. I love that, you know, just to, especially I've had TAs facilitate sessions in the past, and asking them to have the cameras on for that, just because it's a learning process for everyone. You know, that's a really great policy to just request of students. I agree. These are really great. Awesome. So as you all said, I'll have a couple of things that I usually think of when I think of engagement, and you all are getting at the really active learning area of engagement, and not so much these passive things that we usually think of as participation, like just showing up and, you know, even cameras on as kind of a measure of engagement. What are you actually measuring there? And does this require a student to be, you know, neurotypical and excited and giving you eye contact and everything? You know, what are the things that you're kind of requiring of students that you might have to teach them? You know, it's not about, you know, you can't require these things. You just have to kind of teach them and give them a schema for what the expectations are with their cameras on. So again, attending class, watching an asynchronous class video on Canvas. So just engaging with the material is great, referencing that in class, answering in the chat, taking a quiz based on the course reading. So again, acknowledging that the engagement can happen not just with you and the other students, but with the content. And that's kind of what we're thinking of as engagement in this workshop. And then just what you call it isn't important, as long as what you're doing is relating what you're measuring always to the learning outcomes. There's also, you can also relate it to the importance of developing that rapport with your students and developing a class where they know that they're going to be engaging. And so sometimes it might be required to give, you know, a quiz on what the engagement strategies are for this class. And are you required to have your camera on? How many times are you supposed to talk in class, or whatever those might be? So just going through those expectations and making sure that it's totally clear so that all students know what to expect and also have a chance to be successful in this environment, even, you know, if they really don't have an idea of what to expect in a class at AU. So on to the Bloom's taxonomy, which must come up during every CTRL workshop, mostly. The Bloom's taxonomy is a hierarchy or taxonomy of learning outcome verbs that allows you to categorize the different learning outcomes students might attain in your classes. And so it can be used as a tool to write learning outcomes. So great tool for that. Anytime I'm writing learning outcomes, and I write learning outcomes a lot, I always have Bloom's taxonomy up. So always recommend having this up to revisit your learning outcomes, create them, revise them. And the value of Bloom's taxonomy is it shows the learning outcomes from these lower order thinking skills, understanding, remembering, all the way up to what we call these higher order thinking skills, create, evaluate, synthesize, build, those kinds of things. And so there's nothing better or worse inherently about any of these learning outcomes. There's just different goals and different expectations for how much you have to work with content to attain these learning outcomes. So in order to define or recall different definitions, that's going to require a different type of engagement than what we have up here at this create level. You're going to have to work with the material a little bit differently. You know, you're going to want maybe, you know, perhaps flashcards or something at this lower level, lecture classes, just to give students the content. Up here at this create and evaluate level, you want students to be taking it and putting things together, making connections between material, things that you can facilitate in class, but that you know is going to require them to work with the material a lot. And so looking to Bloom's taxonomy, excuse me. So looking to Bloom's taxonomy and aligning it to our engagement techniques, we've seen a couple of studies that have tried to look at the best engagement for the different learning outcomes. And because education research is so, there's so many variables whenever we're dealing with so many humans. But what some studies have found is that, you know, we do see that it's important to plan your course for whatever learning outcomes you're going to be doing. And so Brierton found that synchronous classes, so at the same time, all together, whether it's kind of in this Zoom environment or together face-to-face, those typically aligned with the knowledge level, which is remember, the bottom level of the Bloom's taxonomy. And then asynchronous, so discussion boards perhaps, or class content that you're not doing all at the same time together. That type of discussion typically aligned with the comprehension level. So this understand level right here. So overall, what they kind of were finding was that these classes, these Zoom synchronous classes, weren't able to demonstrate the learning outcomes beyond the remember level. They could only see from the discussion students were having that they were only at that level. And then in something like discussion boards, perhaps where they have time to think about things and work with the content on their own a little bit, they could get up to that understand level. All that to say, it's one study, it's interesting, but the takeaway here is just thinking about what the goal is of each activity you're doing. And so, okay, why am I requiring you to go into breakout groups? It's because I just want you to work with the content a little bit. Maybe breakout group isn't the best for that. Maybe just 5 minutes sitting by yourself, even in the synchronous class, would help you to get to there. So yeah, always thinking of engagement, and it doesn't just have to be engaging with me, engaging with students. It can be engaging with the content a little bit, giving you all like a second to just think and write. All right, so going into exactly what we're talking about and being really thoughtful in what we're doing at every moment, we're going to do breakout groups. And so I'm going to place you into breakout groups of 4 to 5. The goal for these breakout groups is to please first go ahead and just say hello and introduce yourselves as much or as little as you would like to. And I say that there to kind of just add some structure, because I've also, knowing that you all haven't talked to each other yet, you'll want to talk to each other. So I made this group a little bit longer than 10 minutes. So introduce yourselves, say hello. And I want you to answer the question, what requisites what do students need in order to effectively engage in your class or any class? And so think broadly here, everything that you can think of. What are the expectations we have of students whenever we expect them to stay muted in our Zoom class and raise their hand when they have a question? All of those things, whenever we're having them engage, what are those things? So I'm going to give you a Google Slides presentation, and in every breakout group, you're going to be able to take one of those slides and just kind of use it as your brain dump, notes, however you want to structure it as a group. So maybe one person can work with that. You're also welcome to work on your own if that's better. So you'll have about 12 minutes. So in the chat, you should have access to the Google Doc. So go ahead and just click on that Google Doc, open it, because I don't think you'll have access to this chat when you go into breakout groups. So just go ahead and make sure you have that open. At least one person will need it, and you'll have about 12 minutes. Are there any questions before you get pulled into breakout groups? Okay. All right. So I'm going to open all rooms, and I'll set the timer for 15 minutes or 12 minutes, and just let me know if you have any questions. You should be able to join. Let me know if you're having any issues joining your breakout group.
Sarah, can you pause the recording?
And then it's really user-friendly to facilitate, and has continued to get user-friendly over the course of being online in this emergency. So when you call people back, they have 60 seconds to come back. And then, as some people are filtering it now, you get kind of just raptured is the word my partner uses. And I love that. I don't know. It's just, so it describes it perfectly to me. So that was great. I went through some of the breakout groups, and you all were saying phenomenal things. We will not be presenting our slides. I will go through them quickly now because I do want to show just what a great job everyone did. In my classes, what I might do is have students present, or, maybe at the next class, if we had another class coming up, we would definitely present. But because we only have 15 minutes, I do want to move on to some other things. I do also want to note that coming back from the breakout rooms, many of you had your cameras on, which you didn't before, which is totally fine. And I'm pointing this out because I love it. And I see that in my class too. The students do that as well. And I think that's great. It's okay that they don't want to have it on during the lecture portion where I'm talking to them. But if they're going to be talking with the other students, that's a fair trade-off for when they'll have their cameras on, in my opinion, for my classes. So I did notice that trend in here too, and I thought that was fabulous. Great. So a lot of groups talked about the importance of having discussion prompts in advance. That was fabulous advice. Perhaps giving them a quiz to make sure that they have read. And then I also heard the great advice from one group that you might just want to assume that about half probably have not read. And that's pretty good advice going into something where if you want everyone to be able to engage regardless of if they read, just assuming that there were possibly some emergencies, how do you get students to a place where they can engage in the conversation? And so that it's not the students reading who are, doing the whole conversation. How can you get them to a place, whether it's a short reading at the beginning of class, perhaps a quiz to just kind of remember some of the things, or to kind of go back and check the reading while they're there. So those were some really great pieces of advice to think about that students need. Clear organization, that's essential in any online class. I give a lot of instructions to the point where I do think it might be a lot, but I've never met many of you. And so you don't know how I kind of facilitate a class. You don't know that I like to read the chat during class. And just all of those things that you don't know, I like to explicitly say those things. All right, needing to do the reading. Yeah, definitely important for the class to go well for a lot of these activities. Great. Students primed to be polite, creating a dead classroom. This was a great conversation I was listening in on about, I don't want to say what the conversation was about because I only heard a little bit of it, but we've talked a lot about this at CTRL about teaching students who may not have the schema for a higher education classroom in general, a higher education classroom in the United States, and then the higher education classrooms we have at American universities. There's different ways that all of those things are expected to kind of go. And so acknowledging that students might not have an idea that they're allowed to ask questions. They can feel free to private message me if they're a little bit confused and they don't feel comfy. It's not rude, but they don't know that. We're in the classroom as the expert, and it just takes time to demonstrate those things. And so then by the end of the class, you've got students private messaging you if that's what you're comfortable with. Again, these are all things that we're learning what we're comfortable with and what kind of a conversation we want to be having in our classrooms. Great. So you'll have the link to these to kind of check back in, but I do want to go on to some of the other things before we close out. And then this way we also have some time for questions. I wanted to talk a little bit about just trauma-informed teaching and how all of this kind of relates to it. We've heard a little bit about this and talked a little bit about this. Trauma-informed teaching relates to being aware of the trauma that students may have had before your class. And so coming out of a pandemic, we know that there's a collective trauma that's happened for all of us included. So us having to deal with these things is an even harder job as we deal with our own traumas. So that's the goal here, is just to be aware of these things, that this is happening in addition to other traumas that students will bring to your class. The understanding that we've had kind of a, international protests about systematic racism and how students are coming to class, perhaps having had an entire year of being the person in their class asked to educate other students about what's going on, or just reliving these events. And these are things students are bringing to the class that you don't have to address in your classes every class. You're dealing with these things too, But it's important to acknowledge and think about teaching the entire human in our classes. Could make it difficult to engage with others, whether it's because the content is relevant to these things that are happening, or just because they're coming in perhaps not having slept and not having ate and things like that. So the awareness of these things, and perhaps, if you're interested in this, looking into trauma-informed teaching might be helpful. I also set up a Mentimeter poll. I don't think we're going to have time for that, which is okay. I do want to move into questions, but as an alternative to Zoom polls, highly, highly recommend Mentimeter polls as a way to collect feedback from students. It allows you to do the same thing you can do in Zoom polls, but you can also do kind of word clouds. Now I'm second guessing because I do think it would be worthwhile to go through the polls, and then Marianne, you said it in the chat. So let's just go ahead and do it really quick. It shouldn't take more than 2 minutes. We'll have to leave some behind if you're not able to participate fully, but let's see. I've activated it. So the way that you can kind of answer this poll, moving forward, how likely are you to implement breakout rooms in your classes this semester? Likely, perhaps, or unlikely. You'll go to www.menti.com and use the code 4370-7721. Let me go ahead and put that in the chat. Menti.com, great, and we're getting a lot of responses. So you should be able to go there, and then the code is 4370-7221. All right. So we've got 4. If you want to answer perhaps or unlikely, you can go ahead. I won't think that that's what you're doing. And no judgment if it doesn't work for your classes either. You don't have to use all of these things. If you have a class like this, every class, it would be pretty chaotic. We've done a lot of engagement activities for the sake of this. So yeah, great. And then let's move on to the next question. Awesome. And please type 3 words. Oh, I was really excited about this. I'm glad that you all encouraged doing this. So please type 3 words to describe how you're feeling at this point in the workshop. Hopefully this is now showing up as the question that you're answering. And the goal is for this to create a word cloud. So we'll see if it works. Oh, this could have crashed and burned if everyone was like terrified, but this is exciting. Yeah, awesome. Curious, hopeful, a bit overwhelmed. Yeah, that's definitely understandable. It's been a lot that we've talked about, and you are not expected, to do all of these things, nor to implement every single thing in every class, as I said. So, feel like this is just increasing your toolbox, and now you know a bunch of different tools in addition to what you were already going into the summer with. So great. These are beautiful. I love this. I'm going to take a screenshot of this because I just think it's so pretty. Okay. I'll save that into kind of my excited files for getting amped up for workshops. Great. Thank you. All right. So the tools we discussed, just to summarize, we went through a lot. We went through Google Slides and Docs. Qualtrics was the survey that you had that I sent you all before this session. I had about 11 responses, which before we started the session, which is pretty good. I was pretty happy with that. I sent it to about 45 registrants. So, that's an okay response rate to just, I'd love to get to know you. So Qualtrics is worth looking into if you'd like another way to do surveys. Mentimeter we just used. Polls in Zoom are also really great to use. And there's a lot of Canvas. The Canvas office is doing a lot of Zoom tutorials. You'll see a lot of those today in the rest of the sessions today's sessions. And then Zoom breakout groups, I love having Zoom breakout groups and have used it all semester. So to summarize some of the questions, social presence is essential in all classes. I think we've kind of, come in with that assumption, but really taken that home, that that's really important. And engagement during classes can increase social presence. And so online classes are really tough to create that rapport and create that presence of you and then the other students as well. This is a great way to encourage that, which leads to, higher engagement, higher retention, enjoyment of the class, and higher attainment of learning outcomes. Be mindful of what you're measuring and not measuring. When you're thinking about something, trying to go back to, okay, why do I want the cameras on right now? Is it because it relates to the learning outcome of acting in a professional way in professional settings? Then yeah, let me turn on my cameras. Let me ask them to turn on cameras. Is it because teaching is kind of hard with cameras off? That's a valid reason too. You want to be successful at teaching. And so none of these are kind of like better or worse reasons, just getting to kind of what your reasoning is. And that goes a long way in kind of being transparent with students. Teaching humans who've been through collective trauma and just being aware of that. And then learning outcomes, engagement for a purpose, always related to the learning outcomes. We talked about a lot of these things. As I had said, I got a lot of responses on that survey. Things like calling on students, we talk about a lot, always bringing it back to, is that something you want students to know how to do? Like you want them to be able to kind of answer a question at the ready. Maybe, it's definitely possible. Just always go back to, why am I requiring this? Why am I thinking this might be a good technique? All right, so we're right at 11:26. So we have time to talk through maybe a couple of questions. I'm going to pause for a sec, but if anyone wants to raise their hand to ask any questions out loud, yeah, I'll just pause for 1 sec.
Michelle has her hand up, and then I think there are a few in the chat as well.
Go ahead, Michelle. Thanks.
Hi, so I use Mentimeter a lot for my classes, but I paid for my own subscription. Do you think does AU have a subscription for this already, or is that in the works? And now, okay.
Yeah, that would be, I don't remember what the email is to get in touch with them, but if you want to email and we can get in touch with the people to request that, who make those decisions. Because we recently got a VoiceThread subscription, which is fabulous if you've not used that. Yeah, that's a great question, Michelle. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, same with Google Docs. We don't have Google accounts, and students have Google accounts and faculty have Outlook accounts, so it can be kind of tough. So I use my personal Google account to answer some questions. Peter. You're muted, Peter. Sorry.
I was wondering, I have two questions. They don't really need to be answered. One of them is, if we're going to be teaching in face-to-face in the fall, how does Mentimeter fit into that? Can one show that on a screen, for example? And then secondly, if I'm using Canvas, how do I use does Mentimeter somehow fit into Canvas, or is it just a separate entity that you have to, or a program that you have to bring up?
That's a great point. And I should be clear about that distinction. The Mentimeter is not related to Canvas and doesn't really embed with any AU tools at all. So you'd have to take any of that data, similar to like Kahoot or other response systems. It doesn't just easily link in. In terms of the fall, these fit in perfectly. It's really great and a great way to connect with students who are otherwise kind of just all out separately. And then you get them all into kind of a graph together and see that they're all kind of learning this together. It's kind of, it's just as powerful in class. So yeah, I think that's a great use for it to think about. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Let's see. I'm going to stop sharing and I'll just go ahead and share the information or share the slide in the chat. But I think we're right at 10:29. So I'm going to go ahead and thank you all very much. I'm going to turn it over to Lindsay, but I really had so much fun talking with you all today. This was a great conversation. I really enjoyed hearing you all in the breakout groups too. So feel free to reach out if you have any questions. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Erin. Erin, I saved the chat and I can send that to you just in case you want to answer any questions that were left unanswered. But thank you all very much. Sarah is going to put an evaluation link in the chat for us. And then also, if you are joining us for the 1040 Canvas overview session, I believe you were just emailed a reminder email, but let me go ahead and put that link in the chat as well, just so that you have it immediately. Give me 1 second here. Great, thank you, Sarah. The evaluation link is in there. And let's see here. So you can actually find all of the links for today's sessions at that site that I just put in the chat. So thank you all very much for coming. Thank you, Erin, and we hope to see you at the next session.
Thank you.